done. I did lecture for them too in physiology yesterday. Posted it this morning. There's some good students in the physiology class, but overall, it's one of the weaker physiology classes that I've had that I can remember. And it's not just about academic ability. It helps to have academic ability, but it's not actually the most important thing. The most important thing is drive. You've got to really want to do it. And usually when they have a weak class, it's like, well, they're missing a little light on academic ability, and then they don't give a shit. Well, if you don't give a shit, then I can help you. Like the instructions. I mean, who here, can you understand this instruction? Hey, if you are done printing, turn off the laptop and put it on top of the laptop cart. That's pretty easy instruction. I've got laptops on top of laptop cart still on. And the only reason why I haven't put them on top of the laptop cart is I can't trust them to put it in the correct slot and plug it in. So I have to do it. So I asked them, just turn it off. And it's just like, okay, that, I know you understand the instruction, that just means you don't give a shit. Well, that's why I'm one of the weaker classes I've had that I can. And that's good news for you, because guess what? You're competing against them now. That's good news for you, bad news for them. Okay, we ended up on this slide. Last time everybody got the blanks down. Did you write on the bottom that this is not?
It's not.
Did you write on the bottom that this is not the essay?
Yes.
What I'm going to put on the whiteboard is the full essay. Okay, and you can actually see it in this figure. CSF comes from the choroid plexus of the 4 ventricles. The 2 biggest ventricles are the lateral ventricles. So that is where most of the CSF comes from. That's where you want to start. The tracing of CSF starts from blood and ends in blood. Okay? So the capillaries in the choroid plexus, we're going to start in the lateral ventricles, which is where most of the CSF is made. From that point, each lateral ventricle is connected to the 3rd ventricle via foramen. They're just little connections between the 2 lateral ventricles and then the 3rd ventricle. Well, each ventricle has choroid plexus. So, more CSF is made from choroid plexus in the 3rd ventricle. Then it's going to go through the cerebral aqueduct. That's through the mesencephalon. That's why it's also called mesencephalic aqueduct. So on this figure, here in the shadow is the lateral ventricles with choroid plexus. It's going to come out this interventricular foramen to the 3rd ventricle with pink choroid plexus is adding more CSF, and now we're here in the cerebral aqueduct. Everybody seeing it on the figure?
Yes.
Now you're going to go into the 4th ventricle. Since it's a ventricle, it has choroid plexus, so it contributes more CSF. But again, most of the volume of CSF comes from the lateral ventricles because they're huge. Now, When you get to the fourth ventricle, you hit what is called a fork in the road. This is a three-way fork in the road. You can actually see it here. Here's the fourth ventricle down here. One is the central canal. One is out the apertures down. One is out the apertures up. Everybody see the three-way fork in the road? So let's go apertures down. And that's the subarachnoid space. Around the spinal cord. Or central canal, the spinal cord. Down there at the comus, the central canal just goes out to the subarachnoid space, so it's interconnected. Or it can go apertures up. In the subarachnoid space around the brain. So far, so good? Does everybody see it in the figure? Just go below the fourth ventricle. Here on the right. Here's one fork. Oops. One fork. Or out the apertures, there's three of them, down. Or out the apertures, subarachnoid space up. Everybody see the three fork in the road?
Yeah.
Well, you remember when I said that the arachnoid villi are the CSF drains?
Yes.
Well, all you have to, you don't have to think like a neurosurgeon, you just gotta think like a plumber. Wherever the drains are, that's where the water's gonna go. Wherever the drains are, that's where the CSF is gonna go. Everybody got it? So, it's in the subarachnoid space around the brain. So it doesn't matter which fork it goes, it'll end up going this way. Because that's where the arachnoid villi are, which are the CSF drains. Does this make sense? Now, the essay is not going to be a flow chart. The essay is going to be in complete sentences. The complete sentences are coming out of my mouth. But this is the content. From the arachnoid villi, remember they are projecting into the dural sinuses. And the dural sinuses is a big vein in the circulatory system. Which is going back to the capillaries and the choroid plexus. That's also part of the circulatory system. You've just done the tracing starting with blood and ending in blood.
So even if the blood starts to go down, no matter what, it's always gonna end up going back up?
Well, this is CSF now.
Or, sorry.
But yes, no matter, it doesn't matter which of the three forks the CSF goes, it'll end up in this one.
So it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with down and up, like flowing of, you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Well,
Because in my mind, I'm thinking if it's going down, it can't flow up.
Right, and it's basically hydraulics. If the drains are up in the head, even though it's gonna go into all three forks, because the drains are up in the head, it'll end up there.
Okay.
There's no way it's not. And also remember, you got ependymocele with cilia that's kind of sweeping the CSF along this pathway.
So it's, the CSF isn't in blood, it ends up,
It
it starts in blood. and
It came
ends
from
in
blood, and it's gonna get dumped into blood.
But as it's traveling, it's not blood.
It's not blood,
CSF.
it's CSF.
Okay.
And that is because of astrocytes, blood-brain barrier, and ependymoceles. Okay?
Got it.
So do you see why this won't get you all the points on the bottom?
Yeah.
This is for all the points. Are we clear? Okay. That is one potentially large essay.
Does it matter what, words we're using in between, like as long as we say,
Flows to.
it flows to or ends up going here? or-
Yeah, each of these arrows, it's flowing to, interventricular foramen, ventricular foramen. Flows to the third ventricle where more is added, flows to
Okay.
cerebral aqueduct, flows to the fourth ventricle where more CSF is added. Then it hits a three-way fork in the road. The CSF can flow this way, this way, this way, doesn't matter, it's gonna end up here, because that's where the drains are. Arachnoid villi to the dural sinus, now it has returned to blood in the circulatory system. Okay, any questions? All right, now we're done with the central nervous system, let's talk about the peripheral nervous system. And I said this earlier, that this is a gross anatomical distinction, not a neurological one. The same neuron can be in both. As we can see here, the blue ones has the cell bodies in the CNS, but the axon is out in the PNS. So it's not a neurological distinction, it is a gross anatomical one. Cranial nerves, there are 12 pairs. We're really gonna learn this in lab. And then the spinal nerves just continue on down the spinal cord. Again, there are 31 pairs, 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, 1 coccygeal. Same word over here. Oh, and when I drew that picture about how the spinal nerves start out above the vertebra, you can actually see it here. The cervical spinal nerves come out above the vertebra, but since there's an extra cervical spinal nerve after that, the spinal nerves come out below the vertebra. Do you guys remember me drawing that picture on the whiteboard?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can see it. All right, let's talk about spinal nerves. Remember, this is PNS, so it's covered with epinuria. The fascicles are wrapped in perinuria. The posterior root is entirely sensory, but this could be both somatic and autonomic sensory. And the anterior root is entirely motor. Where those two roots fuse, that is what we call a spinal nerve. And technically the spinal nerve is quite short, because after a little ways, it splits into rami. Since the anterior ramus is so much bigger, we erroneously call the anterior ramus spinal nerve. Technically, it's only where everything is together. All right, go ahead and fill in the blanks here. And let me tie it to the figure that I put on the whiteboard before. Haven't I put that on the whiteboard before?
Yes.
Go ahead and fill in the blanks, and let's talk about this. these are just words. Myelinated, sympathetic, preganglionic axons, unmyelinated, sympathetic, postganglionic. And then in the textbook, there's even more words. So what I would do as a student is I would look at this and I'm thinking, there's no freaking way I'm gonna remember this and keep this straight for lectures. But I do remember this, and I do understand this. So maybe if we're just talking about sympathetic, I remember sympathetic comes out in the middle, so what I've drawn here in autonomic is actually more specifically sympathetic. Well, the ganglion for sympathetic is not right in the middle. The ganglion for sympathetic is actually right on the other side of the vertebral column, isn't it? And in lab, I drew something that looked like this. And I said, that model is actually not accurate because it only shows one trunk communicating the anterior ramus to the sympathetic trunk and ganglia. You guys remember that? I said there's actually two. This is showing you the two on this slide. That's why I drew it like this. The white ramus is this guy. It's white because it's myelinated, and myelinated axons tend to be white. Most white matter in the spinal cord is myelinated axon. But it's the blue one, the preganglionic neuron. This is that ganglion, and here's the sympathetic postganglionic. Let's see if this is gonna go. There. Now it makes sense. The blue one is the preganglionic, that's the white ramus. The gray is the postganglionic, that is the gray ramus. Together, it's rami communicantes. It's a pair, it's not one. Does this help at all? Okay, again, when you go lateral to the spinal nerve, you have the rami. Posterior ramus is tiny. Anterior ramus is huge, which is why we erroneously will refer to the anterior ramus as a spinal nerve when it's not. That's because the posterior ramus is just supplying a little bit of the skin on the back for sensory, and just a few of your back muscles. All the rest of your trunk muscles and all your appendages muscles are going through the anterior ramus. That's why it's much bigger. Okay? Just a little bit of the back sensory and just a few of the muscles of the back. Not even all of them, just a few of them. The rest of the trunk muscles, body wall, and limbs are coming from the anterior ramus. That's why it's huge. See how the words coming out of my mouth matches the PowerPoint? Any questions?
You say body surface, like the skin,
Uh-huh.
the whole
each spinal nerve will actually be responsible for like a slightly curved rectangle. That's what a dermatome is. Slightly curved rectangle. No, let's talk about dermatomes. Because if you are having nervous system issues, this is one of the diagnostic tests. They have these little light pinwheels on a roller, and actually can roll it on your back or your side or your front. And if you're feeling, you should be able to feel it consistently all the way through. But if all of a sudden, oh wait, there was a spot there where you picked it up off my body. No, I didn't. But it felt like you did, and that's because that spinal nerve is out. Does that make sense? So you can see these sections, these are the kind of stripes, these curved rectangles that each spinal nerve is responsible for. You can actually pinpoint it. Okay? You know where you see this relevance? In shingles. All right, let me explain a little bit about your immune system and viruses. When I was at UCLA, I took 2 quarters of immunology. In physiology, I have 2 lectures of immunology. For you guys, later on, you're gonna get 2 slides. That's all you get on immunology. But a good way to understand the immune system, even though it has a lot of functions for fighting off a lot of different types of bugs, the best way to understand it is how it fights viruses. And when you see the immune system, it's like a bird with 2 wings. And one is called the cell-mediated wing, and the other is called the antibody or humoral wing, okay? And this is the reason why it's designed this way. Everybody listen to me, because everyone should know this, even if you're not going into healthcare. Viruses are not alive. They don't have, like, our species is Homo sapiens, right? Well, they don't have a taxonomy like that because they're not considered part of the biological world. They are not living things. The only time viruses show any biological activity is when they're inside cells. If they are not inside cells, they are as inert as dirt. That's why the same virus can survive in a glacier for tens of thousands of years and still able to infect cells. They don't age. They're not alive. Are we clear? Thus, if you have a viral infection, the last thing you need is an antibiotic. The word antibiotic means it's something that's going to kill something that's living, which is bacteria. Those are living cells. That's what antibiotics are for, never for viruses. Viruses aren't alive. Are we clear? But viruses, they have one strategy, and that is to turn your cells into virus-making factories. Okay? That's when they show biological activity. They reproduce inside your cells. Outside of cells, they are inert. So the immune system has this antibody-mediated wing that can take out free-floating viruses in your body that don't belong. And then you've got the cell-mediated wing, which are designed to take out the factories, your cells that have been infected by viruses. Does this make sense? This wing takes out the factories. Well, there is some limitations to this wing. For example, it will not take out neurons infected by viruses. And that's a good thing. I mean, who here wants to catch a cold and come out 10% dumber after the cold? Or paralyzed on the left side after a cold? Do you see why your immune system will not take out neurons? And that's why. Love can come and go, but herpes is forever. And that's why chicken pox can come and go. But unless your immune system completely removes the viruses before they get into neuron cell bodies, if it hasn't done that, you're going to have a chance of getting some of this. Those chickenpox viruses stay in the nerve cell bodies in a certain spinal nerve. and your immune system pretty much stays on top of it. But if you have other issues, other health issues, or you're just wound down or too much stress, all of a sudden your immune system can't hold down these chickenpox viruses. They start getting active in the neuron, going down the axon, and they come out, the axon terminals. And you can actually paint a dermatome with these ulcers. And when they freshly pop out, you are highly infectious. Which is why, if you have kids, get them immunized for chickenpox. If they're immunized for chickenpox, they don't have to worry about this. And we still got parents, and this is why I'm saying, even if you don't go into healthcare, you guys need to know this. There's still parents having chickenpox parties. Oh, so-and-so got chickenpox, and everybody goes out to hang out so they can get chickenpox, be over it, and be immune to it. Well, they'll be over it, and maybe out of 100 kids or 1,000 kids, one of them, they'll have an immune system completely take out the virus. But the vast majority of them are gonna be like this. Get immunized for it, get your kids immunized for it. There has been a recent shingles vaccine that efficacy, the ability to keep shingles from coming up again, it seems to be really promising. So, nothing in medicine is 100%. Okay? Nothing in medicine is without risk. But they're looking at this new shingles vaccine as being over 90%, and that's pretty good. Still, just get immunized for chickenpox as a kid. Then you'll never get chickenpox, you'll never get shingles. Does this make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, any questions on shingles?
So if you've had the chickenpox, can you get shingles?
Yeah.
Yes, I
In
got
fact,
it when I was
that's
18.
if you actually had chickenpox and not vaccinated for it, you should get the shingles vaccine.
Because my daughter got vaccinated, but she got the chickenpox this summer, and then the whole family got shingles but me, and I had the chickenpox, so I thought maybe.
It should still be in you. Now, again, there is a possibility that you're one of the few that when you had chickenpox, you took it completely out. So not only are you immune to it, you didn't have any go into neuron cell bodies. But that would be rare. Most people, they have some cell bodies infected, and they just stay there for decades. And then you get older and your immune system kind of lapses a little bit when you get older, boom, you got this. And that's why they're recommending the shingles vaccine for anybody over 50, because it starts coming up. You know, when you're younger, stuff like that is just an irritant. When you get older, all these little things start adding up, and they each become a more serious event.
When I was little, they didn't have the vaccine for chickenpox, I don't think. I don't think they did. How long ago did that come out? Because, I mean, I was born in '87, so I don't,
They had it.
they did?
Mhm.
I wonder why I didn't get it. Well, cause I had the chickenpox too. But I wonder why my mom didn't. That's weird.
Well, again, not all vaccines, I mean, nothing in medicine is 100%. There are people that will get the vaccine and still not get immunized for it. But they're rare. Any other questions? Okay. All right, so remember, all the nerve trunks that go into the limbs come off of networks we call nerve plexuses. So this is where the large nerve trunks come out to go to the arms and legs. There are 4 areas, and you need to know them individually in lab. For lecture, I combined the bottom 2. I told you that, right? I told you that actually several times. So we have the cervical brachial plexus, same as in lab. In lab, we talk about the lumbar plexus and the sacral plexus as being separate. I'm covering it as a single plexus. Okay. Pay attention to things that are highlighted, underlined, or bolded. I'm telling you what I can ask you. Cervical plexus. Mostly C1 to C4, there can be a few stray fibers from C5. For sensory, it's covering the skin on the upper chest, shoulder, and neck, all the way up to the ear, actually. So even though it's on the head, there is still some sensory coming in cervical spinal nerves. Motor is upper back muscles, neck, and the diaphragm. And the nerve that supplies the diaphragm is the phrenic nerve.
Phrenic?
Phrenic.
So when you say high, okay, I was a little bit confused about this. So the bold letters, like sensory, I don't have to know the definition, I just have to know it's sensory, motor, and then major nerve. What about the, parentheses? And then the underline, I see the underline and diaphragm, but like, do I have to know neck, upper back muscles, cause they're not underlined? I was just confused. Okay.
All these PowerPoint files have been distilled from the textbook. Then I take the content in my PowerPoint files and distill them again. The things that are highlighted, underlined, or bolded. Now, if you're only about points, then concentrate on things that are highlighted, underlined, or bolded. But know, a lot is missing from the PowerPoint slide that's in the textbook. I distilled it to this.
Well, and plus for me to understand it, I have to understand.
You have to have more.
Right.
And so this is why I put a little context in it, but I'm just basically giving you a little wink saying, I'm not gonna ask you where the cervical plexus sensory is. That's probably not gonna be a test question.
Okay. Thanks.
It's like, the PowerPoint files are like whiskey. It's been distilled from the textbook. Highlighted, underlined, or bolded is like 1910. It's one of my favorites. All right, so when you get a spontaneous action potentials going down the phrenic nerve, you can get hiccups, and there's various reasons why some people get hiccups, some people don't. What triggers one person to get hiccups doesn't trigger another person to get hiccups. It's pretty variable.
Wondered why you got that. What happened there?
Okay, brachial plexus. You'll get fibers from C5 to T1. And this is basically the pectoral girdle and upper extremities, both sensory and motor. The major nerves that come off of it are radial, median, ulnar, musculocutaneous. Radial and ulnar is telling you where it's located. Radial is always lateral. Radius goes to the thumb. This is showing it more extensive. This is just the roots at the plexus, and then this is the whole thing going all the way into the arm. All right, then let's talk about the lumbosacral plexus. Lumbar is basically T12 to L4, sacral is L4 to S4. So there are fibers from L4 that go in both. This is an intermingled plexus. This is why I cover it as one, lumbosacral plexus. This is basically the bottom half of your body, both sensory and motor, including abdominal muscles, sensory on the inferior trunk. So this is half your body. And the only major nerve I'll have you know is the sciatic nerve, because it's the largest nerve trunk. It technically comes off the sacral plexus, but again, the fact that you can have sciatic nerve problems shows you're getting a lot from lumbar spinal nerves.
Which number did you say does both?
L4. You see this L4 on this one,
Oh, I see.
L4 on this
I
one.
see that, sorry.
Spinal nerves from L4 is going into both, which is why I call this a singular lumbosacral plexus.
Okay.
Any questions? All right, let's talk about what I have over here, and this is gonna also cover another large essay. Remember that somatic are things that you're conscious of, both sensory and motor. Autonomic things are not conscious of, both sensory and motor. Okay? And this is basically what I've drawn on the whiteboard before. I need a little bit more specific to sympathetic here. Remember that the red is the upper motor neuron. And these axons are descending because they're in the CNS. Everybody got that? Upper motor neuron? And now, you know, after we covered last on Tuesday stuff in the brain, now you know why I do this. If it's somatic, this red cell body is in the precentral gyrus, primary motor cortex. This cell body is in the medulla, final reflex centers, the CCC, cardiac control center. Does this ring a bell at all from that big outline on the brain? Well, that's in the medulla oblongata down here. These locations of the red cell bodies were intentional. Even when I did this weeks ago, it was intentional. Everybody got it? Yes?
What's the red that you just read?
UMN, upper motor neuron. Blue ones are lower motor neurons. In somatic, you only have upper motor neuron and lower motor neuron. That's it. And the autonomic side, the lower motor neuron, is blue, the preganglionic neuron. It synapses to a third neuron whose cell body is in a ganglion in the PNS, and that's the postganglionic neuron. Again, I would not remember words when I'm involved in an 8-hour exam, which I had to do for the DAT, 3 days of that for national boards. Part 1 is 8 hours, part 2 is 2 8-hour exams. State board exam was 2.5 days of exams. I'm gonna remember words? I'm gonna remember this picture. I can figure it out when I see the test question. But everything that's on that bottom half of that slide is on that drawing. All of it. Any questions?
So the upper motor neuron and the lower motor neuron, why are they named that if the upper one is technically anatomically in a lower position?
Well, it's not, because the cell body of the upper motor neuron's in the brain, so that's about as high as you're gonna go.
Oh, okay.
And then the axons are descending down the spinal cord. That's
So
why.
you're just showing it lower because it's descending down. It's not physically lower.
Yeah, it's just the first one, and it's, since in the CNS it's descending, that's why they call it upper motor neuron, because it's the highest one. Then it's gonna go down from there.
Okay,
It synapses with the lower motor neuron.
okay, okay. I just got confused. The picture made it seem like it's stemming from the lower part of the brain.
Well, both of these red ones are upper motor neurons. One's somatic, one's autonomic.
Oh, it's where it turns blue. I thought it was the, okay.
Okay, how about if I write it up here?
Am I feeling with it about that? Okay,
Red ones are upper motor neurons, blue ones are lower motor neurons.
okay, I get it. I'm sorry.
And in the case of the autonomic, the lower motor neuron, these blue ones are lower motor neurons, is called the preganglionic neuron, which synapses to a third neuron, whose cell body's in a ganglion in the PNS. And that's the postganglionic neuron. It's basically what it says there, doesn't it? Okay. Sympathetics basically has to do with fight or flight. So let's just do a little table. So we did a brief introduction to these concepts at the very first nervous system lecture, very briefly. Now I'm going to expand on it. First of all, the general function. Sympathetic is fight or flight. You need to increase alertness to either run or fight. The preganglionic neurons, the blue ones, come out of the CNS in T1 to L2. We will call this the preganglionic origin. Where it comes out of the CNS. That's what origin means, where it comes out of the CNS. This is T1 to L2. It's in the middle. Thoracolumbar. It can go from there. Now this is, once it's in the, or once it comes out of the CNS, there are three possible pathways. Okay? Now, because the sympathetic chain with ganglia is on the other side of the vertebral body, it's close to the CNS. Right? It's just on the other side of the vertebra. You guys remember that?
Yes.
Sympathetic trunk?
Yep.
So, just like how I've drawn it here, the blue one tends to be short. The green one tends to be long. That's what it's saying here. I'm going to use colors for you. I occasionally get emails from students that took me like over 5 years ago. And they take pictures of their notes with their Nerd 4-color pens, with flow charts. And they said, I can't believe how much of that stuff you were telling us actually helps. Because I did this. I went to school, had to study to know stuff. All right, now can we use a little logic here? Or no, shall we not use logic? These three rows are related. ganglia is close to the spinal cord, the blue has to be short, the green has to be long. Is that not logical? Okay. And then the neurotransmitters. All blue neurons, whether it's somatic or autonomic, use acetylcholine. But at the effectors, which is the green one, we'll go with norepinephrine. Some you just use straight epinephrine. But whether it's norepinephrine or epinephrine, if it releases either, it's called an adrenergic fiber, because adrenaline is the old name for epinephrine. Okay, so this is freaky. This is also showing you the blurred distinction between nervous system and endocrine system. Did you get enough of that with the brain? Hypothalamus, pituitary gland, pineal body. The adrenal is two glands in one. You have the outer portion and the inner portion. What word do we use for the outer portion?
Visceral.
Huh? What, I thought I heard it. What is it? For outer.
Right.
Inner and outer. We saw it with the hair. Even saw it with the cerebrum. What's the word for outer? Also an adjective for compact bone, because it's always outer.
Cortical?
Cortex. Everybody remember? Cortex and medulla. Throughout the body, people. Inner's medulla, outer's cortex. All right. Well, not only is epinephrine and norepinephrine released here, your body has a way of releasing a full body release in a fight or flight response. To get your whole body ready to run or fight. In the adrenal medulla, there are post-ganglionic cells, both ganglionic neurons, that don't grow an axon. This is what is the bottom of the slide, modified post-ganglionic neurons. Modified green ones. Look at the picture. Now match it to this word, modified green ones. They don't grow an axon, but they release the same thing as this green one, and that is epinephrine and norepinephrine. Except it's not a neurotransmitter. The same chemical is a hormone, and it goes into capillaries and it helps your body generate a whole body fight or flight response. The same chemicals, a neurotransmitter or a hormone. Do you see how the nervous system and the endocrine system is the same system? Everybody see, if you take this ganglion, it's going to go blue to green. You take this, instead of a ganglion, it becomes the adrenal medulla. And the adrenal medulla releases epinephrine and norepinephrine as a hormone when action potentials go from red to blue to the green one. What happens on the heart? Goes from the red to the blue to the green one. And now you can release epinephrine and norepinephrine as a hormone. But it's the adrenal medulla. Same chemical. This is a neurotransmitter at the effector. Okay? Now let's expand on this bullet here. Second bullet's talking about one of three pathways. That's not part of this, but let me expand on it on the next slide. Again, it's going to come out of T1 to L2, and here's the three possible pathways. It can actually go out at the same level as the ganglia it's synapsing with, or it can go in that sympathetic trunk up and down to a different level and then come out of the trunk. And even though we talked about the sympathetic trunk and ganglia, and that's the majority of the sympathetic pathways, it's not all of them. The real world of biology is always more complex than you think. And there are three collateral ganglia: celiac, superior-mesenteric, or inferior-mesenteric. Here for these, the blue ones are actually a little bit longer. So not all sympathetic ganglia are in that chain. There are three that are not in that chain, so that's one of the three pathways. Everybody got it? First two diamonds are in the chain. It either comes out at the same level, or goes ascending or descending, comes out at a different level. Those are the first two diamonds. But the first two diamonds, I would write this on the slide, deal with the chain, the sympathetic trunk. The third one does not. And again, the vast majority of them are the first two diamonds. But there are three sympathetic ganglia that's not part of the trunk. And that's the celiac, superior-mesenteric, inferior-mesenteric.
And that's one of the three, but it has three areas?
Yes, there's three collateral ganglia, but it is the third pathway. First two have to do with the sympathetic trunk, the last one does not. Okay, everybody got it? Again, make sure you understand that these three rows are related. If the ganglia is located in the sympathetic trunk, it's right next to the spinal cord. It's on the other side of the vertebral body. Blue one has to be short, green one has to be long. Why? Because it's close to the CNS. And the post-ganglionic neurotransmitter is norepinephrine adrenergic, but don't concentrate on just that. The pre-ganglionic, like all blue ones, releases acetylcholine. All blue neurons, all lower motor neurons, whether it's somatic or autonomic, are cholinergic. Okay? Any questions? And this is expanding over there on the far right with the adrenal medulla. Hey, doesn't that picture kind of look like what I drew? So this right here would be blue. These 5 circles would be green. These endocrine cells are modified postganglionic neurons. Do you see the blurred distinction between nervous system and endocrine system? These endocrine cells are modified postganglionic sympathetic neurons. They just didn't grow an axon. All right, let's talk about parasympathetic. The general function is ease and feast. Best opportunity to see a parasympathetic response is after everybody stuffs their face after Thanksgiving and everybody gets old fat dog syndrome. Get full, just want to get warm, lie down someplace comfortable. All right. In the case of their origin, they come out top and bottom. T1 to L2 is in the middle. This is cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, and 10. And bottom is 3 pairs of sacral nerves, S2, S3, and S4. You gotta know the numbers for the essay. If you just say middle, top, and bottom, you're not gonna get the points. You wanna know why? Because someone will do it, and it's not fair to them for me to give you the full point if someone else actually does the whole thing and you don't. All right, in this case, the ganglia are usually on the target organ. And if it's not on, it's really close. So we'll just say close to target organ. Well, okay. Here's I drew out sympathetic. If I drew out parasympathetic, I'd have to have it coming out of either the brain or the sacrum. But now take this ganglia right here and put it right here on the heart. I don't have to draw it right. You can imagine this.
Yeah.
How long would the blue one be? Long. How long would the green one be? Short. Do you see how these things are related? These 3 rows are related. Everybody look at me. It doesn't matter what you know. Well, it does eventually when you're in clinic course. On tests, it matters what you can show me you know. This is paired opposite content, these 3 rows. Can you see that? Paired opposite content. You want to know how many times I see students switch them? You want to know how many times I see students switch them and get no points for those 3 rows? This is what you do when you have paired opposite content, is you just learn one. For these 3 rows, just learn one. Choose one, learn this one. On the sympathetic, and just note for the parasympathetic, it's the opposite. If you learn them both, that's when you switch them. Learn one and know the other is the opposite. Then you won't switch them. And parasympathetic only uses acetylcholine for both pre and post.
In our essays, is it okay to use the ACH?
You better spell it out. See, so I got 6 rows, got 2 columns. If I ask this, I bet you anything, that essay is worth 12 points. You gotta not give me a table, you have to give me it in complete sentences. But this is the content. Do not give me a table if I ask it. It's gotta be in complete sentences, but this is the content. Now, in the case of these organs that are innervated, like I drew over there, the heart, it's getting both sympathetic and parasympathetic. In fact, let's go to some of these figures. This was for sympathetic. Let's see. Okay. Look at all those organs there for sympathetic. The iris of the eye, heart, stomach, liver, pancreas, adrenal gland, guts. Now look at parasympathetic. It's the same organs. The same organs that are supplied by sympathetic are supplied by parasympathetic. Everybody look at me. There are no black and whites in your body. We simplify this stuff at the introductory level to make it sound like there's black and white. Like it's either parasympathetic or sympathetic. Like it's either norepinephrine or acetylcholine. There is no black and whites in our body. It's all shades of gray. It's all shades of gray or ratios. Sympathetic to parasympathetic ratios. Even when you have ease and feast, you are still getting some sympathetic response. It's just a lot less than the parasympathetic response. When you're going through fight or flight, you're still getting parasympathetic response. It's just a whole lot less. It is shades of gray. Ratios. Are we clear? That is really seen when we talk about dual innervation. Okay? So your guts is a good example of dual innervation. And you can be in an outside cafe, having a glass of wine, you're going through full-on ease and feast, and then you hear 2 guys having road rage against each other, and you see the screaming cars headed right for your cafe.
Good.
You will instantly flip from this to this. Everybody got it? Yeah, that's not me. Okay, any questions? Those of you LAP students taking today's private exam, be outside the door at 12:25. Don't be late because that disturbs other LAP students. I got like 6, so don't be late, okay?